welcome to the X22 Report. My name is Dave, and this is episode 134. And the title of this episode is Unemployment is Down, Fed Ready to Taper, Economic Collapse Avoided. And if we look around and see what's going on today, we see that the market is closed a little bit in the red, and they had the high-frequency traders and the plunge protection train trying to keep that market up, but they just couldn't get it into the green. Looks like gold is doing much better. It's up around $24 right now, and we're going to get right into the economic collapse news. Okay, let's go out to France. And just a little while back, the French president stated that everything looks good. And back in April, we had a report that the French economy was doing much better. Then in July, Fitch downgraded France from AAA to AA+, and now we're getting word that the outlook doesn't look as good as they thought. The French finance minister has to cut its economic growth forecast for 2013, and the IMF is looking at France, and they are saying if things continue the way they are, by the end of 2013, France most likely will be in a recession. So again, I reported, I don't remember how many episodes back, when the president of France said that everything looks okay and everything seems to be fine. It's always the opposite of what any government official says. I mean, we just have to look back in history and look at what really happened and the actions, not what the officials say. Because if we really listen to the officials, it never turns out the way they say. I mean, let's just go back to 2008. Ben Bernanke in 2008, in the year of '08, said the Fed, the ones that create all the money, that are controlling every aspect of the economic growth and the economy, not here just in the United States, but pretty much worldwide, that they're giving money to all different banks and things like that. He says he doesn't understand gold. This is the person that's, I mean, he's not really in office because the Fed is a corporation, but this is, from everyone else's standpoint, this is the person calling the shots. And back in '08, he said that the Fed is, from all indicators, is not forecasting a recession, and what happened was we had a recession. He also said that the subprime mortgage-backed securities was contained. It wasn't. The president came out and said the AIG would only need one bailout, but they needed 2, 3 bailouts. Besides that, the IMF, the Eurozone, came out and said Greece would only need one bailout and everything will be perfect. But guess what happened? They needed more than one bailout, and now they're really worse off than they were when they got the first bailout. And then we go to Cyprus, where they said, oh, don't worry, we're only going to take, from the bail-ins 4 to 10% or something in that range. Don't worry. And they ended up taking, 47.5%. And don't worry, the capital controls will only, be in effect for 2 weeks, maybe 3 at the most. It's been over 120 days already, and the capital controls are still in effect. So, I mean, we can even go back even further if you want to go back to the Great Depression with the president back then in 1930. He said that the worst is behind us. Everything looks good. The economy is really taking off and growing. And 1932 was the huge stock market crash, and the economy went back into a recession, depression, and everything started falling apart again. So, we can listen to the government officials, but I like to look at the actions of what's really going on, because what's coming out of their mouths are just words that they want to tell you, and everything else that's going on behind the scenes is what they don't want you to see. So it's better to look at their actions and the history of what they tell you than what they're the history of what they've done instead of what they're telling people. Okay, now the European banks are cutting around 5,500 branches across Europe, and this this report goes on to say that the European Union has closed around 5,500 banks across the continental bloc last year, leaving fewer outlets than it had before the financial crisis in 2008. And it also says that the banks across the EU cut 2.5% of their total branches in 2012, leaving the financial industry with 20,000 fewer offices than it had before the start of the financial crisis. And we see the EU doing this, and here a couple reports ago I reported on Bank of America also closing branches and raising capital, and they were closing around 20 New York branches, selling those to Berkshire Bank, 8 in northeastern Pennsylvania, and selling those to Community Bank, 51 branches in eastern Washington, Idaho, Oregon, and New Mexico, and selling those to Washington Federal. And they are trying to raise money, and because it seems like they're selling off, closing, consolidating, because they know something is coming, and they are raising cash right now. Okay. Now, I understand that the government, puts out the unemployment numbers, and they tell you it's 7.4%, and unemployment's getting much better, and they're making it seem like the economy is on the cusp of turning around, and it looks like it's building up steam. They're going to change the GDP calculation, and they're going to include things like research and development and go all the way back to the Great Depression and recalculate GDP, so it will no longer be negative GDP. It will be like positive 3% GDP, and they manipulated the unemployment numbers, so it looks like the unemployment is going down, but instead those people who've stopped looking are falling off, and they don't count those people anymore. But this goes on to say that teens right now face the worst labor market, and they're kids that are from 16 to 19 years old. It's around 23.7. If we use the older calculation, it's probably closer to 50%, and especially those people coming out of college looking for work. It's very high, because if we look at the unemployment calculations prior to 1994 when they changed them, we're looking at unemployment right now at 23%. And if we look at the European unemployment, overall it's around 12%. Spain is around 25%. France is in the 20s. Greece is almost in the 30s, getting very close. I mean, among youths, it's even higher. It's like 60%. Same in Cyprus. So with this very, very high unemployment, you have a lot of people who don't have work, of course, who can't pay taxes to the government, which would help with the debt that the government has to pay the interest on this debt and to create revenue. And we're seeing this all across, even in America, there's not enough revenue in the tax base to pay for the interest on the debt, and that's why the government is continually borrowing, and that's why the spending is escalating and rising so quickly, because there's just not enough. And we saw that play out in Greece, and Cyprus took a different path of doing a bail-in and a little bit of a bailout also. They did both. And again, debt upon debt upon debt with no revenue or new revenue coming in. It's a failed model which cannot sustain itself, and eventually you end up with a collapse, and there's no other place to go, and there's nothing else you can do. Yeah, the U.S. government, they're printing money, but what they're doing is they're putting it all into the equity market. They're not letting it out to small businesses. They're not putting it out to other businesses to expand so they can hire more people. They're just putting it all into the equity market, making it seem like everything is getting better, and they want everyone looking at the stock market. And what's funny is they've done this in the past. They've done this in the Great Depression. The stock market, I mean, back then the highs were like, 300, 400, but in the roaring 20s, the stock market hit all-time new highs, but the economy was doing terribly. But they had all eyes on the stock market, and people kept on putting money into the stock market. And, and then all of a sudden, the market crashed. Same thing happened during the period of the dot-com in 2008, hitting all-time highs again. Everyone putting money into the market. And the economy was lagging behind, and it was completely disconnected. And prior to the 2008 then 2009 crash, the economy and the housing market, unemployment was starting to go up, and all these indicators, but no one ever mentioned any of that because all eyes are on the market. The same thing is happening again. It seems like it's the same pattern over and over and over, but everyone pretends that it's not happening. Oh, look, the housing market's going up again. Oh, look, the stock market's at all-time new highs. Oh, look, who cares about the people who don't have jobs? It makes no difference. And we're seeing this play out again, and it's the same pattern over and over and over. Okay, now, Senator McCain and Graham, they're saying the only viable path for Egypt is democracy. Now, this is funny in a way that what they're saying here, I'll just read what they are saying about Egypt, because you have to remember, they had a puppet government in there. They still do right now, but it's on the cusp of who knows what. They might be losing it because the people are speaking out, and they don't want the U.S. involved. They want Obama out. They don't want the central bankers in there. They don't want a Western central bank in there. They don't want to use the U.S. dollar as the reserve currency anymore. But listen to what they say here. Democracy is the only way for long-term stability in Egypt. Senators John McCain and Lindsey Graham, they both said this. Democracy is the only viable path to a lasting stability, national reconciliation, sustainable economic growth, and the return of investment and tourism in Egypt. And this relates completely to Syria. Now, on the other hand, with Syria, how come they don't say the same thing? I mean, shouldn't we have a democracy? If the people want Assad out, they should vote? But no, not we, the U.S. government central bankers, are funding the paid mercenaries to overthrow Assad. Now, what's the difference between Syria and Egypt? Only one. Syria does not use the U.S. dollar as the reserve currency. They do not have a Western central bank in there where they can loan the money to people with interest. Syria does not have that. Egypt already does. And the U.S. government and central bankers all across the Middle East are very nervous because there are uprisings in every country. In Egypt, in Yemen, in Bahrain, and now in Saudi Arabia, and Tunisia, and Libya, Iraq, Lebanon. We're seeing this happen all over the place. All these countries where the puppet government from the central bankers, U.S. government that were set up there, and all these countries, they had to use the U.S. dollar as the reserve currency, and Western central banks were set up there. The people are starting to rise up, and it's very difficult to keep control of the area. And McCain says but the danger now is the extremist and reactionary forces, some in the Egyptian state and some among Morsi supporters in the streets, want to drag the country down a dark path of violence, oppression, and revenge. This is doomed to failure for both sides. And really, it's a doom to failure if they cannot protect and control and keep the US dollar and Egypt under the control of the US government and central bankers. And you have to remember, the US government and central bankers give Egypt aid of billions and billions of dollars a year. Now, Syria, the army of Syria, is pushing back and defeating the paid mercenaries uh, in Syria. And what's happening is the Syrian armed troops have killed a senior commander of a foreign-sponsored militant group affiliated with Al-Qaeda. And we have to remember that Al-Qaeda is a paid agency by the CIA, and most of the paid mercenaries in the Syrian rebel forces are not even Syrian, and these are starting to flow. And Al Qaeda, all these paid mercenaries all throughout the Middle East, are controlled and maintained by the CIA to either be terrorists or to fight with them however they want to use them. And a lot of times, Saudi Arabia, which is the U.S. controlled central banker, they support the terrorism in the Middle East. They supply a lot of the goods and the weapons and things like that. For instance, Saudi Arabia was making deals with Israel to get guns, which Saudi Arabia then took and gave to the paid mercenaries in Syria to fight Assad. And we see this playing out all over the place. And the Saudi prince is defecting, and it goes on to say here in an exclusive interview with RT, a Saudi prince defector explained what the monarchy fears the most. Saudi Arabia has stepped up arrests and trials of peaceful dissidents and responded with force to demonstrations by citizens. This is what's happening in the Middle East right now. The people are starting to rise up against these puppet governments. They are tired of everything, and what's happening, especially in Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, Yemen, they are putting bans on protests, they are arresting people, and they're trying to keep everything controlled. But what's happening is they are losing control. Now, in preparation for this war that is coming up, because we have to remember, and for those who are new and haven't heard me say this, eventually the central bankers will want, and the U.S. government will need, I should say, to cover up this economic collapse. And one way of doing this is blaming it on another country and then going to war. And you can see that all of these countries are starting to prep for this upcoming war. You see a lot of the propaganda of North Korea having nuclear weapons. They're going to fire over here at the United States. We see Iran, again, they want to get, the U.S. government, central bankers want to get into Iran to implement the U.S. dollar as the reserve currency and set up a Western central bank. And to get into Iran, they're going through Syria because Iran and Syria have a pact together. And if Syria goes to war, Iran will join in and protect them. The problem is that we haven't gone to war, the U.S. government has not gone to war, is because Russia and China are backing Syria. And this is the main problem. And what we're seeing is the U.S. government, central bankers have been trying a lot of different things. They tried the humanitarian route. They tried the chemical weapons of mass destruction. They tried bribing Russia to move aside while the U.S. government, invades, but Russia didn't take that one. They made a statement, the CIA deputy director made a statement saying that the worst threat would be Al-Qaeda getting into a government if Assad was removed, and they tried to assassinate him in his motorcade just a couple days ago, but that didn't pan out, and they could have used the terrorist threat to go into Syria to say that Al-Qaeda's in there and we need to flush them out. But it's not really war. It's a war on terror, which is different. But we're seeing countries right now prep for World War III. We're seeing the United States have a rotational base in the Philippines, which is right near China. We're seeing China and Russia both doing drills together in the Asian Sea and in Russia. We are seeing the United States and Japan have doing drills. We see Australia and the United States having drills. We're seeing South Korea and the United States having drills. So we're seeing a lot of this happen. We're also seeing other things occurring. We're seeing the Japanese trying to change their constitution so they're no longer a pacifist nation where they can declare or attack if someone provokes them. And now they're even taking it a step further where they're trying to change Article 9, but they also want to change it because of cyber attacks and declare those as an act of war. And this is how they're taking it up a notch here. India has launched their first home-built aircraft carrier. And we also have to remember Japan just released their largest warship since, and they started building this back in 2009. So they just released their largest warship since World War II. India just launched their first home-built aircraft carrier, and this report goes on to say, India has launched its first domestically built aircraft carrier on Monday, joining the world's military elite. It comes 2 days after the activation of India's first nuclear submarine, a move hailed as a giant stride in technological capabilities. And these new additions to India's arsenal will enforce its military's presence in the region as China's influence continues to grow. Now, there was another report saying that the Canadian Navy should shift its warships to the west coast in response to China's aggressive military buildup. So we are starting to see a lot of this, and the U.S. government is also announcing its plan to put 60% of its naval assets on the west coast. So, I mean, yeah, can this be coincidence? Well, I really don't believe in coincidence. Everyone does something for some reason or another, and especially countries. The U.S. and Japan and Australia have all taken steps to expand their military muscle in response to the Chinese military Navy buildup. And we have to remember that the U.S. government also is building the propaganda that China is the main cyber attacker into the United States, and any type of cyber attack is an act of war. And they also blame it on North Korea, Syria, Iran, Russia, all the main people that will be the U.S. government and all the other countries will be fighting with all together to make World War III. Okay. Now, let's move on to Mayor Bloomberg with his stop and frisk policy. And for those people who don't know, in New York, police are allowed to stop you without probable cause, without a search warrant, without anything, and just frisk you. And finally, a judge with a brain, finally said, well, this is unconstitutional. You just can't go around stopping people on the street and saying, let me frisk you. It violates the Fourth Amendment. Well, hello. Yeah, it does. And I don't know, and the judge goes on to say, judge says city adopted policy of indirect racial profiling by targeting racially defined groups for stops. Judge says city policy resulted in disproportionate discriminatory stopping of blacks and Hispanics, violating Equal Protection Clause. Judge says city's highest officials turned a blind eye to evidence that stops are being conducted in a racially discriminatory manner. Judge orders independent monitor to oversee compliance with policy changes that must be introduced. Judge says city must adopt written policy specifying circumstances where stops are authorized. Judge says city must adopt trial program requiring the use of body-worn cameras in one precinct per borough. Judge says city must set up community-based remedial process under court-appointed facilitator. And the judge also says NYPD personnel felt or were aware of pressure to increase number of stops after arrival of New York City Mayor Bloomberg and NYPD Commissioner Kelly. Now, Mayor Bloomberg is going out there and saying, "Whoa, whoa, whoa! I'm going to appeal the stop and frisk ruling." And his defense is that he said that at a news conference Monday that the judge displayed a disturbing disregard for the good intentions of police officers. Seriously? They're violating the Fourth Amendment. And we have to go back and remember that Bloomberg, it must be like 4 months ago, where he stated that maybe we should relook at the Constitution because the Constitution is outdated. No, the Constitution is not outdated. Certain government officials want to work and throw the Constitution away because they don't like that it protects the people. And that's why it's really there. It's really there to protect the people. The people put the government officials into their positions. The people can speak out and say, we no longer want you there. The Constitution allows Mayor Bloomberg to be sitting where he is today. Okay, now talking about rights and things like that, the U.S. Spying is targeting activists. They've, the DHS, when there was the Occupy corporatism, the Occupy Wall Street movement, they were monitoring them. They even had something to say they might have to take out some of the people in there if things get out of hand. And right now, the U.S. spying is completely targeting activists. They are not helping the American people for terrorists. It's actually the opposite. The U.S. spying is to spy on each and every one of you to make sure you will not be a problem during the economic collapse. They are putting people on lists. They already have a terrorist list, which Chris Christie, the governor of New Jersey, who created new gun laws, said anyone that is on this terrorist list cannot get a permit or an ID card. But then again, the list is secret. You don't know if you're on there, and you can't get off of there. So pretty much you can put anyone on there, and that's that. The same thing applies here with the spying. Every person is being categorized and put on list, so when the economic collapse comes, they know exactly where to go. They know exactly who to pick up, and it is for control only. And even though, and I said this before, we have to look at the actions of what our government officials do. Even though President Obama said he's going to look into the NSA spying, and we're not really spying on the American people, and we're going to, really look at this hard. A few days after, he said all this, and we're going to reform the NSA, General Michael Hayden indicated that the U.S. spy agency would even act more aggressively. Hayden said on Sunday that the NSA would want to use an advanced algorithm to sieve through the vast amount of data it had collected on the American people. Plus, they're going to get rid of 1,000 administrators in the NSA, replace them with automated computers, so there'll be no worry about whistleblowers, and the entire operation will be completely secret. And what they're going to do is they're going to expand this. This will not end because they know what is coming. The economic collapse is coming. Everything will be turned upside down, and they know it. And the worst thing they fear is a people who are armed and want the government out of power. And they will not give up their power that easily. And this is what they fear most. So what are they working towards? They are working towards shifting the blame someplace else besides them. They will not be blamed for the economic collapse. The Fed, the US government, will completely shift it away to another country. And it's a very simple thing to do. It's very easy, and during this fall there are so many things that are going on. This will most likely, high probability, whatever you want to say, this is not to scare people. This is my opinion of what I see and what I've been looking at from all the stories and putting everything together. Right now, it looks like they are setting the entire thing to show that the economy is about to turn positive with lower unemployment, higher GDP. Europe looks like it's magically getting better. You've heard those stories that, everything's been getting much, much better. Everything's growing, everything's doing better, and they're going to use this propaganda during the fall time period when the event happens. And the event will bring down the economy and collapse it, part one. And they will blame this on another country. And they will tell the American people, we were just about to turn this entire thing around. We were doing everything right, and the economy was about to take off, except for Syria, Iran, China, whoever it's going to be at this time. They're the ones who brought down the financial institution, and it collapsed the stock market. The banks are insolvent. We will have to freeze everyone's accounts. We'll have to do bail-ins. You will not be able to get your money out. And the Fed will come and the government will say, don't worry, just like they did in 2008. Don't worry, we're going to fix this. We're going to make sure that every middle-class person and every person out there gets their money. You don't worry. We are going to help. And the Fed graciously says they will double their efforts in quantitative easing. They might even call it something else at this point. But they will be printing $170 billion per month. And this is what's going to happen, in my opinion, from everything that is being seen and looked at. And we're seeing other reports coming out now that this Michael Pinto has also said that something is brewing in the fall. There are so many things going on, and I've been saying this for quite a while now. And every time I see more and more stories, it is leading up to this. Now, the IRS, and with a lot of government agencies, which we know, and we know the DHS has, acquiring tanks, bullets, and whatnot, and the IRS will not explain why their agents need AR-15s. Now, the Internal Revenue Service has been buying vast amounts of AR-15 assault rifles for their agents and training them on how to use them. Congressman Jeff Duncan questioned, why do they need this? IRS does not want to answer. So that made me think, not just with what's coming in the fall, this is part of it, but everyone has to think of this. They have this gun legislation pending in the Senate. They have the UN Arms Treaty and the gun bill. Obama's telling us, and all the government, in Congress, most of them are telling us, especially Dianne Feinstein, telling us how bad guns are, that, we need to limit this, we can't have that many rounds in the gun, we have to get assault rifles away from the American people, because look at the horrific shootings that we have in all these places. So, Let's use our common sense and just think about this for a second. Government agencies are purchasing weapons. They want the American people to give up their weapons. See what's happening here? Something is happening quickly and things are escalating. And there's only one reason they want people, to they want the people not to have weapons, is because an armed people is the worst fear that they have. And even in the Washington Post, the Department of Education began carrying tactical firearms after it took over the student aid program. Workers for the Department of Education were given access to the Remington 870 police 12-gauge shotgun. So we can see, and this is not it, the Social Security Agency is also getting trained with weapons. So we can see, if we stand back and we take a look of what is happening here. The American people, with the UN Arms Treaty and the gun bill, they want to take all the weapons away. All the government agencies are receiving weapons. Something's happening this fall. We have all the countries building up for this World War III, moving their military assets, strategically placing things in certain areas, using the propaganda that China, Syria, Iran, North Korea are cyber attacking us. And if they cyber attack us, it's like a cyber Pearl Harbor, or a virtual 9/11, and it's an act of war. And we can see this happening, and if you look around, it's continuing and getting worse. Now, we also, along with all of this, we are now seeing drones in the sky. And the U.S. domestic drone use is now using thermal imaging to see into your house without any warrants. They're sidestepping it because they're saying there's no law for it. Well, I'm sorry. That again is my Fourth Amendment. If you can see into my house and you can see what I have, you're violating my Fourth Amendment. Really, that's what that is. And a lot of these drones can be fitted with weapons very easily. So we can see what they are doing and what they are preparing. Now, I've said this in the past that for them to maintain control, of course, the central bankers, the U.S. government, they need to keep control of the creation of money. They need to have control of the mainstream media, which they do. 5 corporations right now own the mainstream media. The U.S. government, Fed, they control the creation of money. The last frontier, which is the wild, wild Internet West, they do not have control of that. But what do we know? Now, again, President Obama said he will veto CISPA if it comes across his desk. It just so happens that CISPA is pending in the Senate also. Now, if he's going to veto CISPA, why did he create the executive orders to support CISPA? Go to the whitehouse.gov site. You will see the executive orders for that. He also created the executive orders to take over all communications, which includes the Internet, in a state of emergency. What that state of emergency is, it's up to him. He calls it. So, to take it a step further, these central bankers in the U.S. government, what they want to do is control the Internet. Now, this way, if they have control, their propaganda, their mainstream media, can continually tell everyone what they want them to tell them. There's alternative media, which everyone knows about, or you wouldn't be listening, which is all over the Internet, showing a different side of every story. And they do not like this. This is not good for them. So, what can they do? Well, they have CISPA, they have the executive orders, they have the emergency to take over all communications. The Pentagon has already set up a secondary internet, which is a wireless 4G system, which is only used by the government officials if the internet goes down. And I reported this on a couple of episodes ago. And they have access to that, and we, the people, do not. So if the internet went down, don't worry, you have no internet, but they do. So how else can they control the internet and make sure everyone is doing what they want? And and also, by the way, there is an internet law that a couple episodes back, I forgot which one, it was HR something or other, where they're trying to make it that if you're looking at different sites during work, it could be a crime, and they're trying to move this law even further so they can stop people from looking at different sites. But to take this a step further, their grand plan is for a global ID. And what this means is every time you sign onto the internet, it will create a profile of you. You will no longer be able to use, and with this law that I just mentioned, HR something, I forgot the actual number, but I have it on one of my reports, you will no longer be able to use a code name instead, because it will be illegal. You will have to use your real name. It will create a profile of you on the internet. It will be the global ID, and it will be used for everything. This way, they can keep track of where you go and what you're doing. And this goes on to say, I'll just read some of it. The grand plan for global ID is to give each person on the planet a way to identify themselves online. One ID number for each person to signify all that they are. This is the full personal profile containing anything relevant for identification purposes. It means all our private details being managed by a corporation. And this is what they're trying to accomplish right now. Now, we know we had this terrorist threat, and we know it was for a couple of reasons. One, to scare Americans, to show people that terror is still out there. Al-Qaeda is still out there. Two, to show why the agencies who spy, NSA, CIA, FBI, DHS, to show why they are relevant. And look how we can capture communication from these terrorists. And thank God we did, because we saved everything that was going on. And we called them out on it, and everything is okay right now. And we opened up some embassies, except for Yemen. During this time period, the U.S. Navy solicited 12 more drones for possible Yemen strikes. Yemen has been hit with at least 8 drone strikes during this period. The embassy in Yemen is still closed. And they're still having a problem. You have to remember, Yemen is the choke point for the Gulf of Aden, and Yemen is, again, they're losing control of the people who are rising up and want the puppet government out. And this is one of their major problems as of right now. The other ones, I'm assuming right now they have some type of control, but Yemen is completely out of control, and they're trying to reel everything back in. And now John McCain is out there, and he just wants to let everyone know that the terror threat is worse than ever. McCain says, look, Al-Qaeda is on the rise. They have continued to penetrate. They have now a free zone in Iraq and Syria areas. The border, Al-Qaeda is strengthening every day in every way because of a lack of American leadership and policy. And what he's saying is they have metastasized in a way that may pose great threats throughout the Middle East. that they can destabilize nations, that they can commit acts of terror literally anywhere, and there's the perception throughout the Middle East that there's no American leadership, there's no policy. What he's saying is we are losing control all over the place. We'll blame this on Al Qaeda. We need to get into the Middle East with boots on the ground from the U.S. to bring everything back into control. That's what he really wants. And it might happen, which it probably will. And President Obama, was saying that, Al Qaeda is on the run, and then there are now other reports saying that they were wrong. Al Qaeda is not on the run. They are getting stronger. They are in more places than they thought. It's getting worse. And Representative Mike McCall, a Republican in Texas, says the threat is huge. It's getting worse, and we need to deal with it in a responsible way and not put our head in the sand. And we're seeing them build up the propaganda to go after Al Qaeda. They're making it bigger than life, and there will still, there's still a travel advisory in effect, making all Americans afraid to leave the country. And there will still, it's August 12th right now, there's still a threat going on throughout the Middle East, and they're still losing the battle in Syria, and they need to get the war started somehow. So they're going to have to do something to get themselves into Syria and then into Iran. So we will be seeing some type of false flag still coming. Even though there's a lull and they're saying everything's okay, that's when it usually hits. When the threat dies down, everyone gets comfortable, and then boom, Al Qaeda strikes again, and we will probably see something like this. Listen, everyone, thanks a lot for listening. Be well, be safe, and especially be prepared. Thanks a lot.